Hey guys, this is Frank Yecker, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Hey, this is Rich Franklin.
What's up, everybody? This is Chris Lieben. This is Diego Sanchez. Randy Couture.
Alistair Overeem.
Hi, this is Stephen Bonner.
This is Don Fry.
Hey, I'm Phil, Mr. Wonderful Davis.
TJ Dillashaw.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
Submission Radio.
You're listening to Submission Radio.
Welcome to Submission Radio UFC 236 preview show. Dennis Skarata with Kasper Ozolowski on a chilly Wednesday morning here out of Melbourne, 10th of April, straight out of Melbourne. A frosty morning cast for the boys, but alas, a hot card on the weekend. UFC 236 around the corner.
That's right. It's a sexy card. Bunch of sexy fights. Oh my god. Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum. Max Holloway taking on Dustin Poirier. I'm excited. I'm all fired up. You're right. The weather is cold, but we're all fired up here at Submission Radio. Luke Thomas returning to the program. I miss my usual dose of Luke Thomas, so I'm glad he's going to be here talking to us about UFC 236. Also, some interesting things happening. Obviously, bare knuckle boxing over the weekend. Want to get his thoughts on that. TJ Dillashaw officially being suspended for 2 years for EPO, so we got to get his thoughts on that as well. And to have him break down his sexy, juicy fights, UFC 236. Sheehan, the beautiful goddamn analyst that he is. Man, I get so excited when Sheehan comes on the show for these preview shows. He is one of the most, I think, underrated analysts in MMA. He's going to be specifically breaking down the main event and the co-main event this weekend at UFC 236. It's a sexy show. Also, Tommy Toehold bringing the laughs. I was dying last time he came on the show and previewed a card. And at this point, it's pretty much tradition. You can't have a Submission Radio UFC preview without Tommy Toehold. It just wouldn't be right. So the pieces are here, the guests are here, everything's here and set up for a sexy show this week for you guys.
Yeah, that's right. Tommy Toehold, a part of the Submission Radio family along with those guys. I mean, can you imagine Thanksgiving dinner at the Submission Radio HQ with some of these great guys that come on here regularly, Cass? It would be unbelievable. So this is a lot like a Thanksgiving dinner because it's a preview of a massive card that's happening this weekend with two fights that I think I'm safe to say that a lot of fans have been looking forward to for a really, really long time. So it's going to be super exciting to hear these guys break it down. Before we jump to it, just a quick reminder for everybody out there to give us your thoughts on the episode down below. If you're watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. If it's iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, leave us your thoughts there as well, a review. And also Twitter and Facebook, of course. You can message us. You can let us know what your thoughts are on the episode. You can send us a DM. We're open to it. We love chatting to our listeners and our friends. So definitely, after this episode, jump on, give us your thoughts, give us a comment, and let us know what you think.
I think the comment section is the thing that I look forward to probably the most once the episode comes out. A lot of oh, Kasper looks orange last week. Yep. Definitely fell asleep in the sun, and any other excuses that I'll come up with. I love it. I love looking at the regular people. I'm like, if this son of a bitch doesn't comment, I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself for the rest of the week. You know, Harvey Weinstein's always commenting. I don't want to start giving shout-outs to every single person because then I'll start forgetting people. But yeah, there's a lot of people that we especially look forward to chatting to in the comment section. And it's always a good time. You know, the comment section sometimes on other channels and other videos, it's just a toxic mess. And someone was saying, like, man, you guys have probably the most positive comment section that I've seen, like, on any channel, and it's because of you guys. So a big thank you to you guys. We look forward to chatting more in the comment section this week. Without further ado, it is time to get the ball rolling. It is time to get the show running. Our first guest is on the line, and Dennis, I believe you're about to introduce him.
Our next guest is one of the busiest men in MMA, you know, from his show on Sirius, his amazing breakdowns, and being the host of the MMA Hour. It's a real pleasure to welcome Luke Thomas back to Submission Radio. And look at this, crispy clear. Luke, you're a crispy duck. It's great to have you back on the program.
Thanks. I don't know what the hell that is, but it sounds pretty good, so I'll be that.
We're trying to start new words in 2019, and crispy duck is running as a good compliment that could possibly take over one day.
Fair enough.
Let's get right into it. You know, and not for nothing, Luke. This Chinese restaurant that my girlfriend and I go to all the time, the crispy duck is the first thing to always run out. So you know, it's like your top of the menu, so to speak. Yeah.
You know, I've never had crispy duck at a Chinese restaurant. What am I doing?
Luke,
come. You are the crispy duck, Luke. You can't eat your own kind.
I suppose that's right.
Come to Melbourne. We will show you how life is lived, my friend. It'll be a great time. Okay. Crispy ducks every night of the week.
All right.
Before we get into it, because obviously a lot to talk about, got to get into obviously UFC 236. But what was your reaction to Bare Knuckle FC 5 this past weekend? You know, the presentation, the president coming out claiming that somebody wasn't going to be getting paid their full purse, and I guess just the entire product. What were your thoughts on it, Luke?
Well, he later retracted that, as I think folks know by now, which was a good decision because that was a really bad call. Yeah. Folks, I had folks saying, it's like, well, didn't Pride do that? Well, it's like, look, it's if a promotion wanted to take a thoughtful approach to combating stalling through financial penalization, I wouldn't be opposed to that in theory. Obviously, the details matter. And I thought Pride had a pretty good system where it wasn't the promoter after the fact getting up there and going, I've changed my mind. It wasn't that. It was the referee making a call in real time about a specific problem, inaction, inactivity, stalling. You got a warning before they took your money. And even when they took your money, it wasn't 50%. Like, there's every way in which they did it was a much more considered approach. So I understand promoters wanting to find ways to incentivize action, and I think that's okay. But doing something like what he did was so ham-fisted and fucked up that I didn't like it at all. But I mean, look, I think we're still trying to figure out bare knuckle. I don't know how you guys feel, but I kind of feel like, for the most part, I think it's okay. I do have some questions about its safety. Every combative sport makes a call about how to make sure you have enough latitude to have strategy and tactics and a thoughtful approach in the game, while also making sure there's a little bit of action. If you look at Glory's rules, where you can only clinch with one hand, you have to fire a shot and then let go. Like, they find ways to incentivize action, and I think they basically get it right for their product. UFC does some things as well. BKFC feels like they haven't quite got the formula right, where they start really close to each other, and there's not a lot of like footwork to use because the ring is kind of narrow and circular. And so I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to force action all the time. I just feel like it's a little bit in the stage of, we got a little bit too much frosting, not enough cake, and they kind of got to get that balance right a little bit. But we're still learning. We're also learning about the health effects. I mean, these guys they look like they were mauled by a bear.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even. They look, have you ever seen like a person? It's like hiker attacked in the mountains by lion or something. Yeah. And then you see their face. It's like, oh my God, it's Jason Knight. So I don't know what it does for brain damage. That part's a little bit unclear. But clearly, the lacerations that come from repeated open knuckles are not great for you. So let's see, man. I don't know that we have a ton of information to make some really hardcore judgments. I think there are some things that need to be worked out, and it's up to them to figure them out, I guess.
It's kind of one of the things I was curious about, because for a long time people discussed bare knuckle boxing as sort of better because, in a lot of sense, because your hands can't take as much punishment because you don't have the gloves, so that you don't get as much damage. But do you feel like with lighter weight classes who don't hit as hard, there might be more damage than in the heavier weight classes, where if it might take a few shots, maybe someone's hand breaks, maybe someone goes down, and the fight is relatively shorter?
Well, certainly in this case, the amount of facial lacerations were insane. And remember, the rounds are only 2 minutes. So they fought for 10 minutes. Now, I've seen just about every injury you could imagine with MMA, including the types of lacerations you get. But there's a certain rhythm to them when you see them over time. They tend to happen over the brow or the forehead, usually not vertical, although sometimes they can happen that way. They tend to be lateral, which is where, the punches slide or the elbows slide, kind of a thing. And I've seen some really bad ones, don't get me wrong, but I don't think I've ever seen lacerations like that after 10 minutes from just punching. So that fight was also a bit of an outlier. That was a crazy brawl. Not all of them look like that, so you have to take that into consideration too. Like I said, there's just not a ton of information to say. All I would like to point out is, in the combat sports space, always remember, there are not well-intentioned promoters, and there are well-intentioned promoters. What you have to always consider is, even a well-intentioned promoter could get a lot of things wrong and is going to make a lot of claims. So whenever I make claims, for example, about one, I love their rule set, for example. Like, I really love their rule set. I think it's much better than the UFC's rule set. However, they make claims about how much better their weight cutting system is. Now, boys, I don't know if it's good or it's bad. I cannot make any claim about its efficacy or value because no one watches them. There's no media access. The information's not released. I had Gary Tonin on my show on Monday. I asked him, Did you see your opponent weigh in? They don't even see that. So everyone you talk to individually raves about it. So there's some evidence to suggest it might be pretty good. I'm simply pointing out promoters are going to say things about their safety. Promoters are going to say things about the value of their product. And a lot of them have to be measured against the reality. I don't know that the claims of safety that BKFC makes are true, but I don't know that I have enough evidence to declare it not true either. It's a wait-and-see approach for me.
I also wonder how differently fighters fight after their BKFC debut, knowing just how much damage it sort of does to the hands, or the way their hands feel afterwards. You saw Artem, obviously, with his hands so swollen. I imagine the next time they fight, they kind of, adjust their approach. And it does seem like it's going to be Lobov versus Malignaggi in June. How many buyers do you think a fight like that can draw for, the promotion? How much interest do you think there'll be? And do you think Artem Lobov has any chance against the former two-weight boxing champion?
After that fight was over, I couldn't tell if he had more or less of a chance. I was like, it's like, well, he fought in a crazy, wild way. You would imagine a Malignaggi would have something to say about that. Okay. On the other hand, he's hard to knock out, and this is a style of fighting with that ring and that way all shoved in together that kind of benefits a brawling MMA fighter. So it's hard to say exactly. In terms of how well it will do, I think it'll do pretty well, man, especially because the price point is really modest relative to the average UFC pay-per-view. If they can time it right and they can get the right number, I think it was $30 here US. If they could do that and they can sell everything the right way, I don't know, man. I mean, a ton of cash, I don't know, but can they clear 100,000? Yeah, probably. Now, most promotions can't clear 100,000 because they're selling it usually at the $65 US mark. This one, they're going for half that. Okay, for half that, Malignaggi versus Artem, that seems very doable.
It's going to be fascinating to see what ends up happening with that. The other big news that we wanted to talk to you about before UFC 236 is this whole TJ Dillashaw situation. We see he's been suspended for 2 years by USADA after testing positive for EPA. What was your reaction when you saw that, Luke? Right now, a lot of people discussing what kind of effect that will have on TJ's legacy and sort of what it does to him.
I don't know that I had much of a reaction, to be honest with you. Probably unlike most other people, nothing surprises me about athletes using drugs. There's not a name on that roster you could show me where if you told me they used, I'd be surprised. Now, I'm not suggesting all of them are using. I'm merely trying to identify the fact that we often try to label fighters or athletes generally in any sport as like, these are the ones that use, these are the ones that don't. And people get that sorting wrong all the time. And I've gotten it wrong in the past with other athletes in other sports. It's not a really, there's no eye test you can do. Not always. Sometimes you can, obviously, but a lot of times you can't. And the ones who are really good beat it for so long that you begin to get gaslit in a way where you can't tell up from down. Nothing really surprises me about it. There are other questions at play, whether this will work as a method of deterrence. I tend to think not, but most people in MMA would disagree pretty heartily with me. And there's obviously a question about what it does to TJ's legacy. I would say inside of MMA, where we have this really scandalized idea about drug use, for better or for worse, it's going to do pretty heavy damage to his career. Now, I'm not suggesting that's my personal interpretation, but just sort of reading the tea leaves out there, we have a real, there is this general view in MMA of drug use as this kind of a line you simply don't cross, even though everyone, or not everyone, but many people cross it all the time. And many of the greatest moments in MMA were built off the backs of it. Never mind that other organizations probably have rampant use and fans will just pivot to them and watch without really any consideration for that fact. But if you're in an organization, if you scandalize drug use in the way that the UFC has, right? Because we're going to have this big press conference. We're going to bring in USADA. We're going to have extra testing. We're going to make this a thing that is constantly in the headlines. Like, what's one thing you don't see in the headlines very often about Bellator? Drug problems. What's one thing you don't see in the NFL for the headlines very much? Drug problems. They didn't scandalize it. So as a consequence, they don't have this repeat appearance of you're on drugs. This person got legitimately caught. This person got legitimately banned. You don't have that. In UFC, you have that all the time. For example, I have Google alerts, and I have one for anti-doping. And every time I get an alert, everything down there is Olympic sport, some kind of anti-doping body overseas, and then UFC news. You never see anything else in any other pro sport, not even stuff in Australia, nothing. It doesn't show up because those sports didn't scandalize it. We scandalize it. So it's just constantly in our face all the time. And so in a sport like that, where we have taken that posture and you run afoul of what is considered to be the right ethical course of action, and to be sure, like, no sport can allow cheating. Like, you can't, if your sport doesn't have rules, it can't function. But to be sure to cross that red line is a backbreaker for your reputation. He will be forever damaged by this. There is some rehabilitation that is possible. We've seen it with other ones who've been caught, but right now it's bad, man. It's really bad.
And Jimmy Smith had an interesting tweet. He spoke about how it's frustrating to see a lot of these fighters get caught post-fact after the fight. He sort of alluded to it being similar to someone getting on a plane with a gun and then getting caught for it later on. Do you feel like the USADA system's working? Do you feel like this whole thing's working out, or does it put fighters at a disadvantage, the ones that don't take anything in going into their fights and then only find out after the fact that their opponent had some kind of advantage going in?
Well, I certainly have many criticisms of the USADA system, but I don't know that would be one of them. I think they're making probably a pretty concerted effort, given the tools that they have, to have a speedy enough turnaround to do a sample collection that is a above board trusted process that's not corrupted by even human error or any other kind of problem, and to test it and screen it, get the results, be sure that they've got these results that they think they do, and by having a certified lab and the shipping the stuff off. Like, people think that this is some kind of like fingerprint scanner. It's not. It's a complicated process. So there are a lot of criticisms that folks have of the USADA process. That's not really one of them that I have. And again, I'll be very clear about this. I have views that are very much considered outlier views by the Overton window of acceptable viewpoints in sports. But my basic view of it is this: that's not really, I think, they could always be better, but I don't know how much better they can reasonably get. Like, there's some lag time is simply inevitable on that kind of thing. I think the bigger issue for me is that, one, we've adopted Olympic cycles of punishment in a professional sport with a narrow window. I don't know how much that makes sense. Again, people will disagree with that, I'm sure. But two, I think my broader point would be they have, since the introduction of WADA in 1998 and the various anti-doping agencies that have grown up in various countries, always remember two things. One, doping is a first world problem. In places and governments where they don't have enough money or cultural attitude to really combat the problem, they don't. It's why it's a big problem in Spain or France or the United States, because, again, we've scandalized it. They don't really have the resources to do that in Thailand or Kenya, and so they don't. So that's one problem. The second problem, more importantly, though, is this sort of escalation of punishment. Folks think that if you just get tough on this, you can solve the problem. And if that was the attitude, you'd have to wonder, why hasn't that worked? Yeah. Right? I mean, remember the attitude, remember the posture here. Like, anti-doping worldwide, folks may not realize this because USADA got this introduction as like the boogeyman. But generally speaking, in the world, anti-doping is in crisis. Right? It's in crisis because it's not working. Right? This is not really much in dispute. There's this confusion in MMA because people think, oh, this is like the adults in the room are here. But the general evidence suggests that in combating worldwide anti-doping, the authorities are failing, and they're failing quite spectacularly at it. Okay? And so what they've done is they've ratcheted up the punishment. They ratcheted up from like 2 to 4 years, I believe, around 2014, because they were saying it's not enough. And again, on those Olympic cycles, right, where you're missing world championships and then Olympics on that 2 and 4 calendar. My point is this following. This is where we are headed. We are headed towards the criminalization of doping. In fact, in certain countries like Spain, in certain capacities, you already see that. I don't know what the situation is in Australia, but here in the United States, if many of your listeners had seen the Icarus documentary on Netflix, there was the guy Grigory Rodchenkov. There's the Rodchenkov Act that has been proposed in Congress. Now, notably, you'll see there's a carve-out. No professional sports, so no MLB, no NFL, no NBA. That doesn't count. But anybody who is, for example, handling drugs for athletes in Olympic sports, they can face criminal prosecution. That is where we are headed. And the reason why we're headed that way is because when they instituted 6-month doping, punishments, it didn't work. And then a year, and then 2, and then 4, and now 8, and lifetime bans. And what they have found is even with those lifetime bans, and I'm going to say it one more time because it's not really in dispute, Worldwide anti-doping is in crisis. So the next logical conclusion is to throw people in jail over it. And so this is my fundamental position. The sporting community worldwide has decided that they are eventually going to put not everyone, but they're going to put people in jail over this to solve this problem, which, as you guys know, the war on drugs, not a great track record of actually solving the problem of lowering drug use. We are headed that way. It is not my fundamental contention is we are headed that way. And I can't seem to warn anybody enough about it, and I can't seem to talk anybody out of it. So I'm just going to sit here and enjoy the ride and then watch this happen. And then I think once we get there, we'll be able to have a better debate about whether or not these get tough policies actually have their intended effect.
At this rate, it'll be the death penalty next, and then I don't really know where you go from there. But you're absolutely right about the fact that it isn't working. Now, Luke, obviously we got to talk about UFC 236 this upcoming weekend. Interestingly enough, it is the first pay-per-view show on this new ESPN Plus deal with the new paywall. How are you expecting this sort of change and affect the pay-per-view buys specifically this weekend? I don't know if I was having a random guess out there, I think this would be between the 150, 250, maybe 300,000 buy mark normally, a pay-per-view like this. What do you think it's going to be like with this new paywall?
Real quickly, what's your situation in Australia?
It is exactly the same. Actually, that's a very good point you bring up. No, in Australia, it's exactly the same. We go through Foxtel, which is the cable provider, and we just buy pay-per-views as per normal.
Okay, so that's interesting. Here, that's everything. As you mentioned, you put all the details in there. Man, I really don't know. I don't know how much the word has gotten out about this to casual fans. I don't know what the UFC is expecting. Obviously, bars and restaurants are supposed to be in a similar position. Yeah. Okay, so that's good. So if you go to your local Hooters or whatever, you'll still be able to watch. All right. I'm an ESPN Plus subscriber. I heard a local radio sports guy. They barely talk, UFC on sports radio here, and he was saying he hated the idea of having to go behind the paywall, and he wasn't going to do it. Do I believe him? Do I not? I don't know. I think your summation is right. 253, 100K under normal traditional pay-per-view guidelines. That sounded right. Golly, man, I really don't know. I don't know if it's going to boost sales, reduce them, meaningfully reduce them, partially reduce them. Obviously, I think it's going to take a hit in terms of the aggregate number, but I honestly don't have a good read on it.
Well, it's an interesting event nevertheless, and we've got Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum for the interim title. I'm wondering, Luke, what do you think if Israel is able to win this interim title, what do you think it does for him? How big of a name do you think he becomes if he wins this interim belt? Because over here in Australia and New Zealand, obviously everybody's behind him, everyone's excited about him. But do you think this adds to his name value if he's able to do it against Kelvin Gastelum this weekend?
I think it's huge. Now, the Gastelum fight by itself, you have to wonder what kind of a corner he's going to turn, which I know is more specifically what you're asking. But I do want folks to consider something. I was thinking about this. If he wins that fight, big if, he could lose. Let's say he wins, right? So that would be 6 fights in 14 months in the UFC. And at the 6 fight mark, 14-month mark, he had UFC gold wrapped around his waist. That is literally from a UFC debut. That's literally one of the best runs from a debut to a title in UFC history. I went back and I looked at some of the other greats who have done it. St. Pierre had a loss in the Hughes fight, I think 3 fights in, something like that. Then you had John Jones. He lost the Hamill fight controversially, but okay, derailed him a little bit. I think he did it in 2 years to get to gold. Now, Anderson Silva's run was better than just about anyone's from UFC debut to title. And he did it in a little bit of a longer term, but, he was finishing everybody and beating champs like Dan Hendo coming over from Pride and just crazy stuff, right? So that was better. But then you look at McGregor. McGregor had the ACL tear after Max Holloway, and he was finishing everyone, but it took him much longer to get to gold. All I'm saying is I'm not suggesting that Adesanya's run is better than all of them, but it's in the conversation. It's in the conversation of one of the best 6-fight, 14-month runs I've ever seen. And so the Gastelum fight, I don't know, but I think what it does is it begins to put him in the – it helps a little bit, right? It's going to help a little bit to be gold, to go back to Australia. I'm sure he'll do a media tour back there. It will help. But I also think it'll have this approximate gain as a visible fighting figure and attractive star, and also as somebody who is doing something special in the sport, which will kind of feed off the other and help raise the stakes a little bit. I don't think it's how much does beating Gastelum get him? I think it's more of what does this process show us? What does it say about us? And what might that be as somebody who is special? And what can we say about it?
And as obviously you know, this would make the Robert Whittaker fight that much bigger. They've each got a belt. It would then become a unification bout. It'd be huge for this part of the world. And even just the rivalry itself, it's been building for so long. I mean, I know he's done it on our show. I can only assume that he's done it on the MMA Hour as well, that he predicted that he'd be fighting Robert Whittaker in 2019, and it all sort of seems to be culminating to that. If he were to lose to Kelvin Gastelum, how much, because you were talking about some of the guys that got derailed on their way, how much do you think this hurts him if he were to lose to Gastelum this weekend?
Well, the good news is if he loses, it would ruin his undefeated streak, which is also part of the narrative. I think it would depend on how he lost. If he got knocked out, that would be bad. If he got wrestled and it was close, that would not be bad. If he got wrestled and he looked kind of impotent, that would be bad. Because you got to remember, it's like Gastelum got out wrestled by Chris Weidman, who's also in that division, right?
Yeah.
So you'd be like, ugh, well, if you couldn't deal with Kelvin, then he's got no prayer against somebody like Weidman or maybe even a Jacare, depending on how things go with Hermanson. So that would be bad. So it really depends on how he loses. I think the good news I would say is, 5 wins in your first 5 fights, you're in a title fight. 1 win is hardly a setback. We just need to see what we learn from the loss in that event, and then make a determinative judgment from there.
And we want to get your thoughts on the lightweight fight, but before we move on, who are you leaning towards in this fight? Obviously, you had the excellent sort of breakdown of his last performance that he gave you the clapping thumb thing for. So if you look at this matchup, are you feeling a specific way about it? Is there a specific person that sort of stands out to you as the favorite?
So this is the Adesanya-Gastelum fight?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say is I'm leaning towards Adesanya, but, I have a bias. I'm not good at predictions. I would not take anything I say here too seriously. It's just the one thing that kind of just resonates in my mind a little bit is, if he's been injury-free this whole time and training this whole time, including this camp, he must have gotten so much better in the last 14 months, like rapidly better, right? So you have to imagine, like, however good he was against Silva, he'll be even better this time. That's one. 2, I can't get this out of my head. I spoke to Eugene Behrman. You guys know Eugene. He is the coach over at City Boxing over in Auckland, New Zealand. And the one thing he said that just kind of stuck with me, and I've been watching it for it ever since, he didn't give me all the details or all the breakdown, but the basic position that he adopts is that if a fighter feints, like this and feints, and like they're showing motion and they're tricking you into thinking they're going to do something and then not, and then whatever, if they feint and then another fighter doesn't, the feinter should always win. Or if both feint, but one is significantly better than the other, then the one who's better should always win. That it is that central to offense, both in setting up yours, diminishing yours, setting up my defensive opportunities, and then ruining yours. They really believe over at City Boxing that feinting is something, like I asked him, he said this out loud, like, they know that they don't have an edge over the world in grappling. How can it be that this little tiny country produces, like, obviously Adesanya is like your torchbearer, but, they've got some other good fighters that come out of that gym. How can it all be that they're that good? And they believe that, like, they'll say it upright. They don't think that they have the edge in grappling. They're pretty sure that they don't. They believe that MMA striking is really behind the times, and that one of the reasons why it's behind the times is because coaches and fighters don't take feinting seriously, or at least seriously enough. They take it very seriously, and they have their guys do it on timing changes, rhythm changes, different looks, different sides. I mean, it's a masterclass when you watch someone like Adesanya do it, which is why people are like, oh, his fight against Silva didn't show much. I'm like, please stop. Please stop. But so that to me has stuck in my mind. And if what he's saying is true, Adesanya is going to be a tough fight for a lot of guys.
Well, that's exactly right, because I was going to say you did a phenomenal breakdown, and one of the things you highlighted was the feinting. So if that is to be believed, then you're absolutely right in your analysis that he's going to be so tough for so many guys, including Kelvin Gastelum. Appreciate the time, Luke. Obviously, we got to talk Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier before we let you go, and it's a fascinating fight because title or no title, it's a great matchup. It's a great rematch between two really, really tough guys. At the same time, you've got this interim title belt. Theoretically, the winner fights Khabib, but there's so many things going on in the background. You've got McGregor essentially campaigning for the rematch. You've got Tony Ferguson campaigning for the rematch. As we know in the UFC, nothing is really set in stone until it actually happens. If you're either man, are you concerned over the fact that maybe they aren't the guy that's going to be fighting Khabib later in the year? It might be Tony, it might be Conor McGregor, it might be someone else for all we know.
I guess a little bit, but maybe not much, because Tony, obviously wish him all the best and hope that he's on the road to a better place and recovery, obviously. Mm-hmm. With Conor and Khabib, that just feels so toxic. I know that there's a lot of interest in a rematch. I heard some people talking about it on sports media here the other day. So they might go that direction. You never know. But it feels so ugly, and the UFC is so acutely aware of how things could get out of hand. Maybe not. I don't know. Boys, all I'm thinking about right now is that I think Dustin Poirier is a worthy adversary. I think Max Holloway is a worthy adversary. There's really interesting questions. This is one of those cards where it's like, this is a real litmus test of like, what kind of a fight fan are you? Because between Gastelum and Adesanya and Holloway and Poirier, there's no fat on that meat, man. That is the right kind of fight, man. Those are two fights, but four guys that are, I think all four are in their 20s. I'm not sure about Poirier, but I think he is as well, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of maybe him and Adesanya are at 28, 29, but just think about that. You got fighters in their physical primes, pretty close to the peaks of their games, if not right at the actual peak, with modern best practices for pretty huge stakes, and you're going to have them on back-to-back fights on the same card. It's like what else are you looking for in MMA if you're a fight fan? That's it. That's the elite. That's the very highest end of the game right there. And I'm really so focused on that, and it's so unpredictable at lightweight. To your point or your question, God only knows. But if either of those guys win, they're also a worthy adversary for Khabib and a worthy adversary for Robert Whittaker.
Wow. I mean, when you talk about it, it just gets me exciting thinking about the fight. Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier, you mentioned the questions. What are some of the questions in your mind going into this fight that you'll be looking to get answered this weekend from both fighters?
Well, one is talking about Max, what happens with a weight class up? What does it do to his game? Does he still have a big punch? Does he take a big punch? Because Poirier is, I mean, he hits you with one of these, player, you're going to feel it. It's like getting hit with a frying pan, So there's a question there about what that's going to do. But I also think on the other side, whatever changes there might be for Max in terms of the weight class, I think I've talked about this before. I think he's got the most modular game in MMA, which is to say he can circle this way, he can circle that way, he can circle this way in either stance, he can circle that way in either stance. And then as I showed on Monday, it doesn't matter what you do, he can set you up to move you in a direction. And if he starts out in this stance and you fade over, he can just naturally find himself here, a la Marvin Hagler, which I tried to show, and he's already in the power position, which is to say he creates angles in ways that no one really else does in MMA. He finds himself in the power position almost more effortlessly than anyone in MMA, and he can make his game, because it's so modular, he can adjust it. He can fight entire fights in southpaw, he can fight entire fights in orthodox, and he can go in between, including in transition. If you watch the fourth round against Ortega, he'd shoot Ortega would come past him, he would just switch stance. And now he's, again, effortlessly, not like in some demarcated way. Like you had to watch the tape to notice it. And then you're like, oh, my God. And so that's why, how did you get over 100 and some odd strikes in a round? Because no matter where you go, he's in the power position. So he can just constantly unload on you. So what you're looking for is, if Max's volume is heating up round over round, that's a real problem for Dustin. That's how he enables that sort of steady state of flow that he gets into, that Hagler-esque flow that he gets into. Conversely, if you're seeing Max not really able to get off because the heavy volume and the angles and the footwork that Poirier is exercising, then that would tell you a lot. But I don't really have a lot of questions about their mentality or their grit or their determination. It's two junkyard dogs, man. It's just two junkyard dogs with really high fight IQ.
And it just feels like one of those fights where, you know, we know Max and Dustin, they both have such heart and neither one has any quit. So that's also partly what makes this such a fascinating fight. Luke, appreciate your time, man. We could pick your brain all day, but guys, catch him on his show, the Luke Thomas Show on SiriusXM, Monday through to Friday. Of course, the MMA Hour. That's Mondays in the US. And of course, subscribe to his phenomenal YouTube channel, youtube.com/Luke Thomas, and follow him on Twitter at LThomasNews. Luke, again, pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much. Hopefully, if the reports are true, we'll see you here in Sydney for potentially Robert Whittaker versus either Kelvin Gastelum or Israel Adesanya. And crispy duck on us, man. Appreciate your time.
I'm looking forward to that crispy duck. Thank you, fellas.
Thanks, Luke. Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Tony Okagui Ferguson, and you guys listen to Submission Radio. Keep tuning in, guys.
What's up, fight fans? I'm the 2-year EPO suspension of mixed martial arts, Tommy Toehold, and yet another event, another huge card is upon us. UFC 236, it's gonna be madness, and Submission Radio has kindly asked me to tell you why you should be watching. So here's why. First and foremost, it is the most interim pay-per-view of all time. You love interim titles, right? We all love interim titles. Well, how about 2 interim titles back to back? Now that's never been done before, right? I think. I don't know, I didn't check. It's like International Fight Week, but for interim titles. From now on, officially, the week of April 13th is the Interim International Fight Week. There will be interim Hall of Fame speeches, interim fan festivals. It's gonna be the second best time you could possibly ever have. Seriously though, these 2 interim title fights have serious implications for 2 massively stacked up divisions, and that's more than enough reason to watch right there. Even if winning an interim title these days doesn't really mean much. Well, it means something, but it doesn't exactly mean you're gonna get a title fight. At least probably not right away. But still, we can almost safely say that there's a decent chance the winners on Saturday will end up in a title fight in the near future, possibly in the divisions they won an interim title. My second reason, the interim title fights themselves. I mean, a rematch between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier, are you fucking kidding me? How could you not want that? The first time they fought, they were merely teenagers, like 14 or 15 years old, I think. Now they're both grown up. Conor McGregor turned Max Holloway into a completely different person. And Dustin Poirier, he has hair now. And ever since he grew that hair out, he has not been one to fuck with. This is truly a clash of 2 of the best in the world. I cannot wait. I guarantee that fight is absolute fireworks. Interim International Fight Week fireworks. And of course, the co-main event for the interim middleweight title, Kelvin Gastelum, a little tough winner who could, and the second coming of Neo Israel Adesanya. Damn, I love this fight. I love the opposing styles. You have this technical master who's like watching poetry be written by Shakespeare on a canvas being held by Prince and Israel Adesanya, and across from him you have this guy who just kind of looks like a guy, but he's not just a guy, he's a fucking killer. Kelvin Gastelum makes great fighters look bad all the time, and people constantly count Gastelum out, and he consistently shows up and beats people up real bad. It's not pretty, it's not fancy, but it is effective. And come Saturday, we're going to see these 2 styles clash, and I'm for it. I cannot wait to see it. The third reason you should watch is Max Holloway could potentially be an interim/regular champ. We have never seen this. Double champ? That's nothing. Big deal. Everyone's a double champ now. But an interim champ and a regular champ? It doesn't even make sense, but it's never been done. Completely unheard of, and probably for good reason. But that doesn't matter. It's gonna happen, maybe. And if you're not there to watch it, then it could happen without you, and you won't be able to say you witnessed the first time a real champ won an interim title too. Not only that, but it's related, so it's kind of like reason number 4. It's a bonus reason. Whoever wins that interim lightweight title, holy fuck, did they just walk into a shitstorm of a division. Lightweight is madness right now. The champ, Khabib Nurmagomedov, is gone till November. Conor could and likely will be fighting for the real belt whenever he chooses against any opponent. Doesn't even matter if they have that belt. Justin Gaethje is knocking the door down. And of course, Tony Ferguson, who was the interim champ before, should have fought for a title like 2 years ago. That division is fucking madness, and Saturday, it's gonna get a bit crazier. I love it. My 4th and or 5th reason, depending on whether you counted that last one as a reason, is that this card is pretty fucking solid all around. You got the 2 main fights, of course. Those are what put asses in the seats. But truthfully, there's a bunch of undercard fights that could end up being pretty damn awesome. Are they gonna be huge names that everyone knows and loves? Nope, they sure aren't. Who the fuck is Boston Salmon? I don't know, but I bet he hits hard. OSP is on this card. Alan Jouban is back. Eric Anders has literally never given a fuck in his entire life. I just have a feeling it's gonna be one of those cards that nobody talked about the undercard beforehand, but we just get madness from start to finish. Every fight a banger. And you know why I think that? Because it's Interim International Fight Week, motherfuckers, and it's gonna be the second best shit all year. All right, that's it. That's what I got. Those are my reasons. Surely I convinced you to watch UFC 236, but if I didn't, well, fuck it, I tried. Submission Radio, thank you guys so much for having me on the show. I can't believe I get to do this so often. You're the fucking best ever. Back to you guys.
This is Chael Sonnen, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is one of our favorite people to speak to, from his amazing work on Severe MMA, a true MMA mogul and one of the top 2 MMA media members in the world of FIFA. We can't say number 1, but he's number 1 in our hearts, and he joins us here today. Sheehan is here on Submission Radio. Sean, I was going to say something better, but then I thought about Becky Lynch, I thought about Sheamus, I thought about the terrible matches that represented Ireland over the weekend, and it just took me by surprise. How are you today, and welcome to the program?
I'm good. Limerick's on. Becky Lynch won. It doesn't matter. All we do is win, win, win. It doesn't matter how we do it. We just win. Limerick won the hurling, won the All-Ireland, won the league. Becky, 2 belts. We're just winners around here. Like it just feels so great to be winners, and it's all we do. That's all we do is win. But it's good. How could I not be good? Basking in the beautiful summer sunshine, even though it's 12:30 outside. No, how could you be any better? It's great. Limerick winning, Becky Lynch winning, Finn Balor winning. We won't talk about Sheamus, but yeah, it's great. Couldn't be better.
Sheamus didn't knock out anybody's teeth. Isn't it weird that Becky Lynch won the 2 titles, but she can never win when she tries to do a promo on Raw the next day after, and it sounds terrible? Isn't that disappointing?
It wasn't that bad, really, was it? It's that crowd. It's hard to do anything with that crowd. They just like song over it. Yeah,
how dare you, sir? No, but in all seriousness, it was before we get into UFC 236, Sean. We just want to quickly mention Wrestlemania. I mean, we were all watching it. Casper wasn't, but I was. I was in a bar. People
50% of us were watching it.
We were all watching it. You and me, Sean, and and a couple of other people that you only see every year when you try and watch WrestleMania because no one else wants to really watch it, and you got to call them up and be like, will you watch WrestleMania with me, because I got no one else to watch it with, and I don't want to sit here by myself and watch it because I feel weird. But anyway, what did you make of WrestleMania, and what did you make of the event itself? Because a lot of people saying that the finish of the match in the main event was a little bit funny. There were a few funny things like Mrs. Dad coming out, but then there was a few positive things as well. How do you rate this one?
I thought it started very well. I think it was smart to start with Brock Lesnar and Seth Rollins, and that was a kind of a short, good match. The Daniel Bryan Kofi Kingston match was really, really good. The tag match wasn't bad, but then it was a 7-hour-long show, and the crowd started getting very tired. That Triple H Batista match just absolutely killed them. It was probably a grand match, but I was just even sitting on my couch watching. I'm like, God, I just want this to be over. And by the time the main event came, they'd be really, really tired, but they should also get up for it. Like, the crowd was pretty shitty, to be honest, that they didn't get up for the main event.
Again, attacking with the crowd.
They were, in fairness. The main event wasn't that great.
In the space of 5 minutes that you've destroyed.
Fuck them, fuck the people. But yeah, the main event wasn't that great, but I think it would have been made better by a better crowd. If they were over, you could just tell that the wrestlers were kind of, is this it? Like, is this the main event of WrestleMania and nobody's saying anything, and they're playing with a beach ball, and I thought it was just pretty awful. And obviously the finish, I don't know whether it was a botch or whether it was meant to be like that. I presume it was a botch, but because they didn't mention it in Raw the next day, and but it was a bad ending really to what was like probably a 6 or 7 out of 10 show maybe. But overall, look, it was great to see Becky Lynch winning the belt. Great to see Finn Balor winning the belt as well. And, some good matches. The NXT show the couple of nights before was way better. To me, that Ricochet and Aleister Black match against War Raiders, I think it was, the tag match was like one of the best matches I've ever seen. And the main event was really slow as well. But then towards like the last 10 minutes of it, it became like one of the best matches ever as well. So it was a good weekend for a bit of pro wrestling.
I think the problem with the WWE was they didn't have the president of Bare Knuckle FC come out halfway through the show and say that the main event wasn't going to make their purse if things didn't pick up. What do you think about that? I think he'd be a great character for the WWE.
I love the way he did that, and then he came out like the next day in a tweet and said, "No, I was only messing. I'm not actually doing that." Like, what? I just did it to rile up the fighters. Are you trying to be Vince McMahon? Like, yeah. No. This Bare Knuckle FC. Like, I don't know. It's hard because we cover MMA, right? And for us to come out with this all righteous indignation about Bare Knuckle FC, it's a bit rich of us, really, isn't it? And we like watch lads baiting the heads off each other, kicking each other's shins in the head every week, like to come out and see lads boxing with bare knuckles and say, "Oh, that's awful," you know, it sounds terrible, but it is terrible. Let's be honest, it's too far. And the biggest issue with this as well is the single biggest issue because all of that dangerous and blood and guts and all is bad, but it's not going to last. Let's be honest here. This dude cannot afford to pay Paulie Malignaggi and Artem Lobov to fight and survive. Not a fucking hope. It's just not. It's not going to survive. How can this guy a multi-millionaire or something? Maybe a billionaire. That's the only way. Like, how is he going to pay those lads hundreds of thousands when you get like some Hicksville in America with 2,500 people in there and 35,000 people buying it on Fight TV? Let's be real.
And apparently the more exciting fights happening in the crowd while the show's happening as well.
There was one going on Twitter. Yeah, I saw there was a big hard-looking fucker hit a few slaps in the couch. These things happen in bare knuckle boxing, I suppose.
Oh man, it's going to be interesting. I'm just curious to see how some of these guys survive, because if you go breaking your hands every single fight, and getting your face cut open to that extent every single fight, how many fights can you have until you have to retire? It's pretty crazy, but we'll see what happens. Malignaggi. We're here to talk about UFC 236, and I feel like half of the people have already tuned out of the program. So you're on the cusp of tuning this thing off on YouTube, or you're just about to turn down the dial on your phone. Don't. We're about to get into the good stuff. UFC 236, there's a lot to talk about. The first thing is this matchup between Kelvin Gastelum and Israel Adesanya. Before we get to it, I mean, we were sort of discussing this amongst ourselves, Israel Adesanya's journey. Sean, I mean, he's had a remarkable year. How do you rate what he's been able to do in the UFC thus far in such a short amount of time, being able to fight an interim title this weekend?
I think it was 4 fights in a year since he made his debut or something like that, when the 4 fights were over and won them all, and looked kind of better as he did it. You'd have to, like, it was funny, we were doing the awards obviously at the end of last year, the start of this year, and I was talking to Graham about it, and like, what do we call it? Like, we're doing prospect of the year, and like prospect of the year, and like, should Adesanya be in that? And we're like, yeah, of course he should be, because he had like no or maybe one UFC fight at the start of the year, but in like the space of one single year, he turned in to a guy making his UFC debut who we called a prospect to now fighting for the UFC title, and looking good fighting for the UFC title. Like, he probably deserves to fight for the UFC title. Okay, Robert Whittaker, as you know better than anyone, is out injured and everything like that, but he definitely deserves it. He's improved each step along the way, I think. Okay, he maybe didn't have the hardest road in the world with kind of the ghost of Anderson Silva and Derek Brunson and Marvin Vettori and whoever else he fought, but he looks good. He looks like a really, really great fighter, and he definitely deserves it. I know we'll probably get into analysis and stuff of it, but his ability inside the octagon it's new age stuff, really. He is the next... he is the next era of fighter. We're seeing it right here and right now. I know maybe he's not there yet. Maybe Kelvin Gastelum will beat him or whatever. But he is the next level. He is the new level of guys coming up. And, it's exciting when you see someone like Israel Adesanya coming through, and see him coming through so quick in the space of a year. It's great for the sport, and great for the sport over in Australia as well, especially.
Well, I was wondering, Sean, like, what sort of questions do you have for Israel regarding this fight against Kelvin Gastelum that you hope to have answered? Because we saw, when he started, he was succumbing takedowns. Now, since Derek Brunson, nobody's been able to take him down. Of course, one of those fights was Anderson Silva, but against Anderson Silva, we saw him outstrike arguably the middleweight GOAT. The Tavares fight, even showed that he can go 5 rounds. What are you sort of hoping to have answered once this fight is done?
What I'm looking for, I think the biggest question in this fight for Israel Adesanya is the jab. And that might be an odd thing to say when it's a long guy. Well, it's not an odd thing to say, actually. It's what you think of when a long guy is fighting a short guy, and a guy who kind of uses his length, uses his reach. He should be jabbing. He should be using his jab like Stefan Struve should be, never does, like John Jones should be, or whoever else uses their jab. But Kelvin Gastelum is one of the best guys in the world at fighting long guys and using their jab against him. So when you're jabbing Kelvin Gastelum, he swats it away, he punches the jab, he takes it away, and he gets inside with either the big shot for wrestling or the big left hand inside, like he did to Michael Bisping, or like he did, he's done in most of his fights. This happens all the time. So for Israel Adesanya, you're looking at someone who might have to abandon his jab, who might have to abandon that kind of long fighting, keeping someone at the end of their jab, because Kelvin Gastelum is so good in that situation. Now, maybe he'll go out and he'll win that battle. That's another thing that could happen. And if we see that, I think he's next level. But I think to make it easier for himself, he has to switch things up. I could really see Adesanya throwing really, loads of backhands, coming out, throwing leg kicks, throwing big right hands right over the top, not jabbing as much, not getting into that battle. Because if he gets into that battle with Gastelum, it's not a battle he'll lose, I don't think, but it's a battle that could go 50-50 or 60-40 or something like that. But I think he has other ways of changing up and making the fight more winnable for himself. When you asked me that question, I presume everyone thought I was going to say wrestling or something like that. But I think Adesanya's wrestling game, his takedown defense, has improved an awful lot. Watch any of his old fights. I have a rewatch coming out here on Thursday Irish time, and I look back at the Brunson fight. You look at any of his fights recently, although there isn't that many of them, I suppose. All he does, gets the overhook, pulls you up, tries to control the wrist with the other hand. That's all he does, and that's how he survives wrestling and takedown attempts right now. Gastelum will need to be ultra quick, not let him get the overhook and get the takedown straight away inside, and that's a big part of the game as well. But I think he's more assured in that position than he ever has been before, and I think it's going to be a tough night for Kelvin Gastelum, definitely. But there's still questions to answer for Israel Adesanya. This is his biggest step up yet. No disrespect to Derek Brunson or Anderson Silva, but I think there are questions, but not too many, really.
I was going to say, you did a good job of sort of talking about some of the elements of his striking, but sort of if you had to break it down, like even though he knocks people out in highlight reel fashion, it's more accuracy as opposed to one punch, knockout power. He's not a devastating power hitter. He talks about how he likes to just touch people, and I guess that makes sense why he doesn't like predictions, because he likes to feel the fight out, and when he sees the opportunity, he likes to go for it. Against Anderson Silva, that opportunity didn't really come, so he didn't really take any unnecessary risks. Against Derek Brunson, it did come. But if you had to sort of summarize what makes Israel Adesanya's striking so effective and so good, what do you think it is, Sean? Is it the distance management? What is it that makes him so good?
I think it's his timing and his ability to pick shots perfectly. Like, that's what Anderson Silva was great at as well. And, when they were fighting, I think everyone before the fight was kind of saying, oh, this is two very similar fighters, but one's old. And they aren't very similar fighters. But I think if Anderson Silva was 25 today, he'd be a very similar fighter to Israel Adesanya, if you know what I mean. And that's why I say he's like the next level, the new level of guys. Because I think what he does is he fights like Anderson Silva. And I mean like Anderson Silva. He picks the shots, he waits, he tries to draw you out, and then he takes the opening and hits you with a big knockout shot. But how MMA has changed over the last few years, his output has gone up. And his output, if you look at, say, an Anderson Silva from 4 or 5 years ago, the output of power shots that he throws is way less than what Adesanya throws right now. So Adesanya mightn't throw knockout shots every time to knock a guy out. He will feel for it, he'll wait for it. But he'll also throw maybe, okay, if Anderson Silva back in the day threw 3 or 4 around, he'd probably throw 15 around, if you know what I mean. And another thing about Adesanya as well, he isn't just this counter fighter. He isn't just a guy who will wait for the shot and then throw it. He'll go looking for it as well. He will attack and he'll hit you with those big kick over the top. That's why I say that right hand without the jab is going to be a big shot for him as well. I think he does that. But I think the kind of the essence of his striking, and what makes his striking so great, is his fakes, his feints. If you watch his head, it's like he's headbutting the air in front of him, because he's like, some guys do it with the jab, with the fakes. He fakes with his head. And you think he's going to come forward by the way he moves his head, and he makes you react, and then he hits. It's like little things like that. Even we say in MMA, you have the 2 hands, the 2 elbows, the 2 knees to throw strikes with, and the 2 feet. He also has his head. He has his body. Like his shoulders move. It's like little tiny things that he does. All parts of his body move. He's very fluid, Adesanya. And I think That is the new level of fighter. And then he can do everything with that as well. He can counter, he can attack, he can do it all. He can use his lint. And that's why I think against Kelvin Gastelum, if he doesn't kind of have that lint, or if he doesn't use that lint, to show another way he can win fights, to come inside with big hooks and big kicks inside, low kicks as well, maybe against Gastelum without getting taken down. So I think we could see a new string to his bow here. But I think what we already see is absolutely phenomenal. He's really, really great.
Let's talk about the mental game here as well, because Kelvin obviously was scheduled to fight Robert Whittaker back at UFC 234. Him and Israel were in camp around the same time. The only difference is Israel fought that night and won, whereas Kelvin had to sit out and watch from the sidelines with Henry Cejudo's belt on his shoulder. And Kelvin kind of never got that release. On the other side of things, and the flip side of things, Israel Adesanya has been meaning to go on a holiday for about 100 years. He was talking to us about the fact that he's had cameras in his face. He looked tired when he spoke to us, but this was a number of weeks back because he was doing a whole bunch of UFC stuff. So he's never been able to really sort of, I suppose, to really take that break that he needed to. But he has had that momentum in back-to-back fights. So looking at it mentally, is there a guy here that has an advantage in your opinion?
I don't know. And that should always be the answer to that question, because we don't know. That's the thing about this. Like, I can go back and I can look at, 10 fights of Adesanya, 10 fights of Gastelum, and I can tell you how they fight. And, they could come out and fight totally differently. Israel Adesanya could come out and look for a takedown. Who knows? It could happen. We don't know. But this is one thing we 100% don't know. Israel Adesanya, he could have his house robbed tomorrow, and he has a shit week, and his preparation is terrible, and we don't know what's happening. Same goes for anyone. We don't know. That's the big problem with this. But what we do know is for Gastelum in the past, he is a guy who can blow hot and cold. On his worst day, he's absolutely terrible, and he can, he'll not give up, but get beaten, and give up the game plan, give up the kind of mental warfare in the fight. But on his best day, I'm not sure there's anyone in MMA who rises to the occasion as much as him. He fights up at the level he's fighting now. Even from the first fight against Uriah Hall, okay, Uriah Hall is not as good a fighter as maybe we thought he was, coming through the tough and everything like that. But other fights as well, the Jacare fighter, you pick out lots of fights from Kelvin Gastelum. If Kelvin Gastelum is mentally in the right place, he is a tough matchup for anyone, and he can rise to that occasion. I suppose that's an aspect of Adesanya's game as well that we really don't know. He hasn't had it that tough in the UFC. Now, he's been taken down. He's had some tough fights, and he's come through them 100%. But at the rate Gastelum has done it, with kind of coming into fights as an underdog like Gastelum has done, we maybe don't see that from Adesanya. So, like, you look at that and say, okay, if this fight goes into the third, fourth round, maybe Adesanya's won 2 or 3 or 4 of those rounds, and then Gastelum comes late. Does he have the mental fortitude to keep going kind of late in? I think that's the kind of mental aspect of the game which I'd be interested in, which I'd be looking forward to. As to which, the preparations, you'd have to ask them, and even if you did, they probably wouldn't tell you the truth anyway. So that's always the unknown, coming into these fights with lads like that.
I was going to ask Sean, before we move off this fight, I'm not expecting necessarily a prediction, but who are you leaning towards? Because I get the sense, and you sort of said, you alluded to it earlier, that you're leaning towards Israel Adesanya.
Yeah, I think Adesanya will win. I would not rule out Kelvin Gastelum. He brings power in that left hand. As I said, if Adesanya comes out jabbing, which I think most people on the face of it would probably expect him to do, I think that could play into the hands of Kelvin Gastelum. So if he comes out with a bad game plan, or a game plan that doesn't work, Gastelum can take him out 100%. But I just expect Adesanya to be a little bit too much for him. I think if Gastelum is reaching a little bit too much, if he's throwing big shots over the top, if he's getting frustrated by Adesanya, it's something which you can be. It could be a tough night for him. Also for Gastelum, what makes him special, and we've seen this with loads of other guys, it's his ability to throw those shots and his ability to go straight forward and get that takedown. And if he goes straight forward and goes for that takedown, if he goes straight forward and goes for that left hand for 5-10 minutes and he can't land it, he can't get the takedown, Adesanya gets the overhook and he puts his back against the fence and he turns him out every time, then it could play into the kind of the mental game. Then it could play into him getting tired. It could play into, how am I going to win this fight? I've no way of winning this fight. It could let Adesanya open up, and it could, Gastelum could go to a position where he's not throwing. He's kind of stuck in the rut, and Adesanya is just kind of dominating him. And I think that might actually happen. And I think this could be a 3rd or 4th round win for Israel Adesanya. But I wouldn't be too sure. As you said, he's a guy who'll wait for his chances. He'll take his chances. When he gets them, he'll also create those chances. And when a chance comes, he takes it. Adesanya, if he hits you with one big shot, like the Derek Brunson fight, he hit him with one big shot. Lots of lads might have got on the end of their jab and maybe pushed him against the fence. We've seen it loads of times. Adesanya went for the kill, big knees inside and tried to knock him out. I think if that happens with Gastelum, he'll do the same. And it only takes one shot for Adesanya to hurt the guy and then finish it. So to me, I think that'll probably happen third or fourth round, I'd say, for Adesanya. But, you'd never know, really.
That's right, Sean. I'm very excited for that. But, of course, the other big fight on the card is Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. Max obviously lost the first fight on the ground where Dustin submitted him via armbar. Since then, Max has established some of the best takedown defense in the division, and he and Ortega couldn't even come close to putting him in trouble. Not only is Max's takedown defense good, but his movement and distance management is incredible. How do you think this fight looks compared to the first one all these years later?
It looks absolutely nothing like it. I did on the rewatch last week over on our Patreon, and after watching it, I'm like, I'll just immediately forget about this. It's kind of pointless watching. They're two totally different fighters, especially Holloway. Holloway, he looks like a child in that fight. It just looks nothing like it's not the same fighter at all. It's absolutely, it's kind of pointless watching that fight. The only thing I would take from it, you mentioned there, he won by submission. If Dustin Poirier can get the fight to the ground, we kind of sometimes forget Dustin Poirier's jiu-jitsu ability and his, the amount of submissions he's gotten in the UFC before. And not just submissions, not just, knocking a guy down and getting a rear naked choke or a takedown. He has some dash chokes. His jiu-jitsu is just funky and brilliant, and he's devastating with it. So if he could get Holloway to the ground, I think that's the only thing maybe you can take from the first fight to kind of remind yourself of how good Dustin Poirier actually is on the ground. But other than that, yeah, I wouldn't really be taking much from it, to be honest.
The other thing is, since moving up to 155, Dustin's been more durable. He's arguably, had even more carry power. Max obviously fought a lightweight at the very start of his career, but what kind of benefits and changes are you expecting from Max now that he won't have to cut all the way down to 145? We don't really know how much that cut really drained him. He never seemed like, the craziest or biggest of weight cutters in MMA. We're not talking Conor McGregor levels, but you got to think this change will work in his favor, right?
Yeah, you'd hope so. He carries a lot of power at 145 pounds, and he carries it late as well. One thing maybe that I would be looking for is, watching these old fights, and especially the Aldo, it was the first or second, one of the fights, and the fight where he knocked him down early, or he got knocked down by Aldo early, sorry. He looked to be building into the fight, and he does that in his 5-round fights at featherweight. He maybe not starts slow, but Max Holloway is a guy where the first round is not as fast as the second round. The second round is not as fast as the third round. He is one of those guys that he just goes up. It's an upward trajectory through the fights. And maybe that's got something to do with the weight cut. So maybe he comes in here, isn't cutting that much weight, hasn't all the water drained out of him. Maybe he'll go in there and he'll be able to fight head first from the very, very start. Or maybe he won't. Maybe we're reading a little bit too much into it. I suppose a weight cut is another thing that we don't actually know until the fight goes down. But you'd hope that this is two guys fighting at their absolute optimum. Two guys fighting at the weight where they should be fighting at, not cutting too much weight, and with the ability to show us everything that they have. And if that is the case, we're going to have a really, really great fight here, I think.
Yeah, because I was going to say both guys have so much heart and zero quit in them. Are you expecting this to be kind of the kind of fight that potentially can take a fight of the year sort of candidate and maybe even take a few years off a fighter's career? Do you think it could end up being like a Gaethje Poirier or a Holloway Ortega type fight?
I really think it could, yeah. And the thing about this is Max Holloway is one of the best, probably the best in the world at going forward, making the octagon small in the middle of the octagon, which is, it's an odd thing that anyone can do, but he does it so unbelievably well. And Dustin Poirier is a guy who loves that. He loves when you come onto him. He will, he'll circle with you and he'll meet you there and he'll throw his jab. Like I was talking about the jab in the other fight. The jab is going to be so important in this fight from Dustin Poirier because he needs Max to come onto him, but he also needs him, not to come onto him too much. He wants him within an arm's length, but he doesn't want him inside of it. So he's going to have to circle around, stop Max Holloway from cutting off the cage, and not really stop him from cutting off the cage. He has to, kind of let him cut off the cage, but in Poirier's benefit. When, Poirier is going to circle one way and Max is going to follow him around. But it's when you kind of come from point A to point B, whoever lands first at point B, I think, is going to go far to win this fight. And Poirier is absolutely brilliant at that. He did it against Justin Gaethje, who, okay, he's not a good fighter as Max Holloway. He's not as technically good, and when they fought anyway, he's definitely improving an awful lot. But I think Max Holloway is like a better version of Justin Gaethje, different, but in a similar way when they're going forward. And Poirier absolutely ruined him in that portion of the fight. You know, when you circle with a guy who is circling away, you think if you have the ability to break down that circle and, you know, cut off the cage, that you're going to win that battle. But it's not always the case. Poirier will jab the face off you. He'll get into boxing exchange. And I don't just mean striking exchanges in an MMA cage. I actually mean boxing. He turns into a boxer. He hits the body 3-4 combos upstairs, just turns into an absolutely great fighter. Now, Holloway, he does the same. He can hit you with big combinations, big shots, knock you down like he did to Jose Aldo, and, you know, made a mess of Ryan Ortega's face. He's a great fighter as well. Like that, this fight to me is going to be a fight which is in the middle of the octagon, fought out between two guys circling around the cage, baiting each other's heads off. And it's all for me. I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be phenomenal for as long as it lasts.
I was watching some of their fights last night, sort of, you know, researching it, and this does feel like a pick and fight to me. Like both guys are just so good at mixing it up. You know, you think about Dustin, like he has so many finishes in the early rounds, and you think, oh man, if this goes into late rounds, it's Max's game. But then you remember that Justin Gaethje win from Dustin Poirier, and they both want it so much. Like Max has always been hungry. Dustin's hungrier than he's ever been. The guy's starving, basically. Are you leaning towards anyone here, or is this too hard to sort of predict at this point, Sean?
I'm very 50-50. I'm leaning a little bit towards Poirier, and that's funny because I like, there's no one in the world at the moment higher than me and Max Holloway. I think he's the one to beat Khabib. I really do. I think he can beat Khabib. But this is going, like, if he wins this fight, Max Holloway, I think, is a pound for pound number one fighter in the world. I'd favor him 100% to beat Khabib. It's a tough matchup for him. The thing about this, I agree with what you said there. Early, if Poirier can land, and Poirier, I think people underestimate his power. Apart from maybe McGregor, I think he's the hardest hitting 155 pounder in the world. No offense at 155 or 145 even to Jeremy Stevens, but I think he's really great. He hits so hard early. But the thing about it is as well, you know, we will say, and everyone will probably say, the later it goes, Max Holloway has lots of third round finishes. I think he finished Jose Aldo in the fourth, didn't he? You'd say that Max Holloway favoured there. But look at Poirier's recent fights. So against Eddie Alvarez and against Justin Gaethje. He finished Justin Gaethje in the fourth round, I think. To finish Justin Gaethje that late, that answered all the questions you ever had about Poirier and his ability to be a warrior. He answered those questions in that fight. And if he can keep going, if this fight goes into the fourth and fifth round, Max Holloway is going to be getting faster. He's going to be getting raw. He's going to be throwing big shots. And so is Poirier. Poirier carries power late as well. God, I'm excited about this fight. I really, the reason I think Poirier will win, and I'm just saying this because I kind of have to pick someone, is because of that jab and his ability to stop Holloway in his tracks early. If he can do that early, and Poirier or Holloway kind of lets you do that early sometimes, I think Poirier could maybe do enough damage to kind of kill Holloway's chances as it goes in through the last 3 or 4 rounds. Because if you get damage, if you get big shots, a few knockdowns, you know, he got that knockdown against Jose Aldo. Didn't make much difference. But you also must not forget that both these guys have been fighting an awful long time. And Max Holloway has taken an awful lot of damage. And we remember what happened to him last year where he had to pull out of the fight where, you know, it looked like he had got knocked. We don't know what happened. It looked like he got knocked out in training or something. All those things add up. And Dustin Poirier hits really hard. And if he's open early and Poirier hits him, you know, it could change the whole... it could change this whole fight. Look at what Justin Gaethje did. He hit Edson Barboza with one big shot there last week, and it changed the whole fight after 35 seconds. The same thing could happen here, and that's kind of why I think Poirier will win. But this is 50-50. I'm not really picking anyone, but I just think it'll be a really great fight.
Well, there you go. A Joe Rogan-esque build-up to the fight that goes down at UFC 236. Sean Sheehan. Of course, catch him on Twitter at Sean Sheehan, BA. Severe MMA, one of the hottest podcasts going around. Just quickly, Sean, I saw you and Jeremy Botter did a little episode leading into Wrestlemania. What are some exciting things coming up that people can look out for in the future that you do? Yeah,
I actually have a whole 20-minute podcast coming out on Thursday. I mentioned it earlier. I look back at Adesanya versus Brunson, but I also talked about, like I did here, but a little bit maybe more in depth for a little bit longer about the two title fights and the kind of the analysis around them. We've loads more things. I did maybe last week. I talked to Cage Warriors commentator Brad Wharton about the UK MMA scene, about Bellator coming in with all these new shows, about what's coming up with Cage Warriors and stuff like that. So they have an awful lot of good, good fighters and stuff there. I did a show with Zane Simon of Bloody Elbow, the state of the UFC. We spoke for like 70 minutes, I think, about every division, every fighter. It's a really good podcast if anyone wants to listen to that there. And if you sign up for a $5 a month, you get all our old podcasts. So I think there's we're just doing around a year now, so there's like 52, 53 episodes of the rewatch there. So loads of it. I do that every week. There's a Q&A every Monday, early access to the main podcast, keeping me busy. So sign up, severemay.com/Patreon or severemay.com/points. It's the price of a pint a month.
That's right. Well, it's one of the best things going around in MMA today. Sean, thank you so much for coming onto the program. As always, we love your analysis and insight, and we can't wait to see what happens at UFC 236. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, lads.
Well, there you go, guys. Our Irish friend from across the pond, Sean Sheehan, doing an excellent job of getting me personally, and I think I'll speak for you as well, Dennis, when I say that we're both even more excited for the fights this weekend after speaking to him and, of course, Luke Thomas, which, I think is kind of the whole point of a UFC 236 preview show. So congratulations to those guys on an accomplished mission right there.
That's right. I mean, a very, very fun program. A big thanks again to Sean Sheehan, Tommy Toehold, and Luke Thomas for coming onto the program. Big thanks to you guys for checking it out. As always, Submission Radio will be back next week. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and we can't wait to see what happens next, Cass. It's a crazy time to be a fight fan. Interim titles everywhere, and Submission Radio will be back to give you our thoughts next week. Thanks, guys.